Tomb Raider 2, released only a year after the first game, was also given the same remaster treatment last week as the first one. As I just finished capturing footage from my first playthrough of the remaster, I thought I would follow up my original video I made last week, which was on Tomb Raider 1. Again, I will talk about a few changes made by the remaster as well as the design of the original game. I know I said I would not cover the stories in these videos, but in hindsight that was a pretty stupid move. And some of these stories can be summed up in only a couple of sentences, and this in itself completely eliminates any concerns I had, which I talked about in my last video. Can't believe it's been less than a week since I uploaded that, and I'm already thinking about how lackluster it is. Anyways, while I thought that Tomb Raider 1's story was not anything that blew me away, I liked how it did not take focus away from the gameplay while still providing context towards in-game situations. And for the most part, Tomb Raider 2 follows that same trait. This time, the story follows Lara as she tries to uncover a mystery about this ancient Chinese dagger that apparently turns people into dragons while also trying to stop an Italian cult leader from misusing its capabilities to cause havoc. That is just a brief summary, and there are more elements to the story, but I will admit, this one is a lot better than TR1 even though they are quite similar. I did however think that the first game did a much better job of establishing character, but I did like the villain in the sequel more. However, story aside, I hear a lot of people say that this game failed to innovate upon its prequel, and while I can somewhat see why, I will refer back to this statement later on. Anyways, let's start the game. The first chapter is set in China, where you will immediately notice the skybox. This was present in the original game, so it's not a new addition like the one in the Lost Valley. The beginning of the game is quite a short section, and there is only one single stage in it. But there are parts of this stage which are quite difficult, surprisingly, especially with the control scheme. Some highlights include this outdoor area, a marathon of traps which is similar to the final level of TR1, and the first new weapon of the game, the grenade launcher. Every weapon in Tomb Raider 1 returns in this game, with the exception of the magnums. They are nowhere to be seen. New weapons include the automatic pistols, M16 rifle, and a useless harpoon gun. Next we travel to Venice, not a location you will immediately think of when discussing TR, hence why I argue this game did in fact innovate on its prequel. However, Tomb Raider 2 takes pride in the inclusion of urbanized environments, and despite looking different cosmetically, they still offer the same level design. Another change to this game is the addition of vehicles, one of which is this boat. It controls fine and functions as it should with assisting within traversal of bodies of water, but you can't use weapons while in it. This is a problem as this level is full of mercenaries, some of which have firearms. Once they have a lock on Lara, they will never miss any of their shots, which feels a little cheap. Because you cannot defend yourself while in the boat, it means you must slowly get out of the boat, and into the water, swim to a ledge, resurface, climb out of the water, and then you can defeat them. But in the time it takes to do all of that, the enemy will most likely have taken a significant portion of your health away, meaning finishing some of these stages without using a health kit is practically impossible. This means my save count for this game is extortionate. I save my game after almost any enemy, as health kits are a lot more scarce in this game than the first one. You might think I dislike the visuals of these stages, as it goes against everything that I praised the first game for. In fact, I like everything in this chapter aside from the cheap enemy placement, and I would be lying if I said that that didn't hinder my experience as a whole. The final level of the Venice section is set in this abandoned opera house, and this is one of my all-time favourite stages in the series. It is not like any opera house you've ever seen before though. It's completely flooded, full of rolling boulders, shattered glass, and dozens of sandbags which fall from the ceiling. A change made by the remaster comes in the form of this giant light, which was not present in the original game. I don't really like this one, as I feel the cool colours of it go against the tone of the rest of the level. One change I do like is how the sky was changed to more of a warm and orange colour in the second stage. It was always a bit awkward how it went from broad daylight to pitch black darkness in a matter of seconds, and this fixes that. So overall, I'm a huge fan of the ending of this chapter, and the first two stages were not too bad either. Next we get to the third section of this game, set on an offshore oil platform. Only two stages here, but I really don't like either of them. Essentially both levels are all about collecting keycards to pass on to different areas, and they seem to be in the most awkward of locations, such as being underneath a circular saw. It's not a good idea to pick that one up. There is also an extremely annoying alarm sound which plagues most of the stage. They even put a button halfway through the stage which turns the sound off, but then they turn it back on just minutes later, so what's even the point? These two stages are also crawling with mercenaries, and I should probably talk about the different types of them. Firstly, there are ones that carry cricket bats, and these ones aren't too annoying. In fact, I kinda like them because they don't have ranged attacks and make sense in some locations. Secondly, there are ones with handguns. They do hit you often, but don't do too much damage, so it's not the biggest problem. Next, there's the flamethrower enemies. It's a guaranteed death if they touch you, but they have poor range on their weapons. There are also harpoon shooting scuba divers, which are really annoying to deal with. But the absolute worst enemies in this game are the ones that carry shotguns. As soon as they see you, they will constantly shoot you and practically never miss their shots. They also take away so much of Lara's health and are common to come across. Not to mention, having human enemies completely takes away the sense of isolation you get with these games, which is something I gave Tomb Raider 1 a lot of credit for. If it's not already clear already, I don't like the human enemies in the slightest, and they're plastered throughout most of the game. Other noteworthy parts of this chapter include an annoying jump you have to do over some green acid, and a ladder which takes over a minute to climb. Boring as hell. Honestly, I have little to nothing positive to say about the oil rig chapter. It's extremely monotonous and my least favourite part of the game so far. The second stage is much worse than the first if you ask me, but the first one is only marginally better. I'm still not a fan of it. Let's move on. In contrast to the mind-numbingly annoying offshore rig chapter, we have my favourite chapter of the game. It takes place on a sunken ship and is quite long, consisting of 4 stages. The first two, while having a fair amount of mercenaries in them, are amazing. Fun puzzles, great visuals, and some scary moments. I especially like the second stage. It's sprawling yet never gets cryptic and is a blast from start to finish. The remastered version of the game makes this the definitive way to play these stages, and it makes the game worth playing by itself. But then we reach the third area, living quarters. This level gave me a really hard time on this playthrough. Looking back, I never found this stage to be that frustrating, but I have to admit that cannot be further from the truth. This is easily the worst stage so far, and that includes every level from Tomb Raider 1. Too many enemies with guns, platforming sequences with issues with depth perception, and some incredibly shallow level design. Nothing sticks out here, and I cannot think of a single memorable area besides maybe the theatre room. Without a doubt, the worst part about this stage is this room. It has more gunmen than I can count, and the game asks you to move blocks while being next to them, and is far too small to accommodate intense combat. Not a fun stage in the slightest. But following on from my miserable time in living quarters, we get to my favourite stage of the entire game, which is the deck. When the sound plays when coming out of the interior of the ship, it's one of my favourite moments of the series. This stage is massive and there are so many areas to explore and secrets to find. Secrets in TR2 now come in the form of dragon statues. There are 3 in each stage and finding all of them rewards you with some items. One of the secrets in this stage has you do this crazy jump near some broken glass, a personal highlight. I also love the underground lake with sharks in it, and how it gives you the option to swim with them or platform around the edge of the room safely. I have heard people say that this stage is too complicated, but some of you may not believe me when I say this. I completed the deck in less than an hour without a guide on my first playthrough years ago. This level is amazing. The shipwreck chapter is my favourite part of the game. While 40 Fathoms has elements of mediocrity and Living Quarters is just flat out terrible, Wreck of the Maria Doria and especially the deck are outstanding stages and some of my favourites in the series. If only the next part of the game was this good. After resurfacing from the sea, Lara finds herself in the mountainous region of Tibet in rural China. And I absolutely despise this first stage. Tibetan Foothills. That name will give you nightmares. This stage has you ride a snowmobile through some mountains, and it has some of the worst controls I have ever seen in a video game. I praise the boat from the Venice chapter for how it assisted with stage traversal, but the only thing the snowmobile assists you with is falling to your death dozens of times. The level also has you backtrack through most of it near the end, which doesn't help considering how many pits are in it. It has more pits than a Crash Bandicoot game, and the snowmobile always seems to slide around into them, which causes it to explode, killing Lara instantly every single time. There are also more human enemies who ride around on machine gun equipped snowmobiles, and if they so much as barely brush Lara, she dies instantly. It also doesn't help that this stage seems to go on for what feels like forever. Worst enemies and worst level of this game. End of story. However, I do like the rest of this chapter, so let's keep going. The remainder of the Tibet section has Lara travel through a monastery and the caves below it. Thankfully, there is no more god-awful snowmobile riding involved. The monastery section is pretty good as well. You have to collect 5 prayer wheels scattered throughout the building. It's nowhere near as challenging as some of the scavenger hunts in Tomb Raider 1, and the pacing of this stage is on point. Also, this secret right here is so annoying to get. Clamping doors and rolling blades in a tight corridor with this game's camera is a recipe for disaster. In this room we have to drain this pool of water. For some reason moving this block over a stream of it causes all the water to vanish. It also feels weird not seeing the frame rate dropped to the pace of a PowerPoint presentation in this part. In the original game it felt like the PS1 was about to catch on fire. After this stage, you traverse through some caves, more great stages, although I could do with less snow leopards and monsters. You get introduced to these bouncy pad things, but be careful of them, as it is easy to fall to your death. Here is another dumb secret. Need I say more? What are these games' obsessions with invisible floors? Anyways, there's a boss fight near the end which is entirely doable by standing on this rock so it can't hit you. My opinions on this chapter have changed dramatically. I used to enjoy it a lot, but even though most of it is a good time and the remaster has made these levels look amazing, I hate the first stage so much that I think this chapter is just okay. And so we reach the Chinese wilderness, the final part of Tomb Raider 2. This first level is incredibly long. And when I say incredibly long, I mean really, really, really long. Just when you think it's about to end, it just keeps on going. I don't actually think it overstays its welcome, as making progress in this level feels rewarding. It's a gauntlet of traps, and feels similar to the Atlantis section of Tomb Raider 1 in a way. As I said in my last video, I thought that the trial and error traps in that stage were unacceptable to put in any game, as dying to traps did not feel like it was your own fault. In this stage, however, even if you haven't played the game before, you won't find yourself dying that often. Rather, the length of this level comes from the sheer size of it. There are so many different areas in this room, but I don't find it to be complicated in the slightest. In fact, I don't think any stage in this game comes close to being as complicated as things like Natla's Mines or the combination lock puzzle from Tomb Raider 1. In fact, I would say that aside from the snowmobile controls, this game is actually a little bit easier than its prequel if you ask me. If you weren't a fan of constantly getting stuck but preferred the action elements of TR1, then this game is for you. This overall is another outstanding stage, however. I could replay it endlessly. Moving on with the game, we get to this section. It is like nothing we have ever seen before. This stage is actually compiled of numerous, as the name suggests, floating islands. Falling means instant death, so don't do it. It also has these statue warrior things in, and they really put up a fight. The M16 rifle and grenade launcher make this stage a hell of a lot easier in my opinion. My advice? Save ammunition for these weapons as you progress through the game, because you will need it here. This stage is a lot shorter than the last one, and I really enjoy it. Now we reach the final boss encounter, which is this fire-breathing dragon. It goes down fairly quickly, but if you get set on fire, it's inevitable that you will die unless you jump into the water. Afterwards, we have another collapsing ceiling sequence, and the game ends. Or at least you think it does. There's one more stage which takes place in Lara's house, and it really is just shooting more mercenaries. At least with this one, the large open space makes dealing with them a lot easier. This part doesn't last very long to begin with, however, and as soon as you defeat the last enemy, Tomb Raider 2 has been completed. Here are my final statistics. I found all the secrets and finished in about 13 hours. Come to think of it, that means that one level took me almost a sixth of my time with this playthrough. Crazy stuff. To conclude, my overall feelings of this game have changed a lot. Like with Tomb Raider 1, the remastered version is without question the definitive method to play this game, not even worth playing the PS1 or PC version for the most part. This game also has some of the best stages in the series, with Opera House, The Deck, and Temple of Shan being absolutely outstanding in terms of quality and stage design. Other areas like Wreck of Maria Doria and Floating Islands are also some of my personal highlights. Although I did not cover much of the story at all, it is my favourite of the PS1 Tomb Raider games and I love the ending. I also love the music and updated look of the game, besides the giant light in the Opera House. If you like the immersive feeling of Tomb Raider 1 but you did not like the complicated stages and sprawling level designs, then this game is for you, hands down. But in my opinion, it's not perfect and there are many things that legitimately annoy me. Firstly, the human enemies. The ones that carry cricket bats can sometimes be okay, but every other type feels unfair to the player with the hit scanning and cheap placement, especially the shotgun wielding ones. They also take away the sense of isolation you get because you are no longer the first person to explore the places you visit. In a way, it makes sense for their inclusion in some stages like Venice and the monastery, but in other settings such as the shipwreck, I'm not a fan of it in the slightest. Another issue is the terrible vehicle controls. I wouldn't mind it so much if you could shoot enemies with ranged attacks while in the boat, but the snowmobile is just terrible, constantly slipping and sliding around and causing countless unfair deaths. My final complaint is that two of the stages, Living Quarters and Tibetan Foothills, are some of the worst levels in Tomb Raider if you ask me, but I've already been over them so I won't waste my breath. And that's effectively all I have to say about Tomb Raider 2, a game that I mostly enjoy and still view as a great title, but this game has not aged well. If you like TR1, it's probable that you will have a good time with this game. If you don't like getting stuck, I'd argue you would enjoy it more. But for me, I still prefer the original by quite a lot. And like before, I will follow this video up with Tomb Raider 3 fairly soon.